Welcome to Inspiring Possible. I'm Christy Pennison, former stuck person turned therapist and dream consultant. Are you feeling stuck, overwhelmed, uncertain, or just need a little inspiration? Then I want to help you gain the clarity, confidence, and courage to create possibilities and live a life you love. Because folks, life's too short to be miserable. Hey, possible people, welcome back. I am so excited. I feel like I say that all the time, but I just get excited when I do these podcast episodes. I hope you get excited listening to them. But today I'm really excited because I think we're going to talk about something that I know myself at different points have struggled with. I know that I have a lot of friends that struggle with this. I also know that in my role as a therapist, I've heard people really struggle, wrestle, grapple with this. And it is a word called self acceptance. I know some of y'all might be cringing right now, or you're like, is she going to talk about how I accept myself? Yes. So just hang on there because I have an expert in this radical self acceptance. So if you've struggled with really just accepting yourself for who you are or giving yourself permission to make mistakes and learn and grow, and you're already uncomfortable by all those things I've said, then I hope you continue to hang in here because we have Dr. Laura Gallaher on the show today, and she is an organizational psychologist who inspires driven self starters, which I know that's some of y'all, to transform their relationships with themselves. Because y'all know I say that's the longest relationship you're ever going to be in, to accomplish more while making everything easier for you and for the people around you. So, welcome, Dr. Laura.
Thank you for having me, Christy.
Yeah. So, okay. I know everything starts with a story of why we're passionate about some of the things we talk about, but how did you really find yourself being like, this is what I want to help people do? Learn
Mm.
how to radically self accept them too, and how that also influences change around everybody else.
I will tell what might feel like a long story to get to the point, but I think that
Love it.
I think it's impactful. Okay, so
Yeah. Go.
so Christy, do you remember the Space Shuttle Columbia accident that happened in 2003?
Slightly. I was
Slightly.
finishing high school then, so
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. So you were old enough to like be conscious of it and everything. So a lot of people think about the Challenger accident, which maybe you weren't alive for, I don't know. That happened in the 80s. A lot of people think about that one because NASA lost Challenger during the launch and everybody was watching. But NASA actually had two shuttle tragedies, and Columbia was the second. The Columbia accident happened in 2003, and unlike Challenger, which was lost during the launch, Columbia was lost on reentry. And I'm sharing this story because I actually started my career back in 2006 working for NASA to help with the culture change initiative as a result of the accident. So I won't go into a lot of the details of what happened with the accident, but in short, there was this piece of foam that fell off the external tank during the launch and it hit the orbiter. And that didn't cause a problem when the orbiter was literally orbiting the Earth and it was doing its mission. But what they didn't know is that the foam had actually damaged the shuttle so badly that the heat shield failed. And so when Columbia got the green light to come back to Earth, NASA lost all 7 astronauts. And so the investigation looked into it, and they said that NASA's culture was as much to blame for the accident as the foam itself. And so you'd think, okay, so they had a bad culture, disengaged employees, overbearing managers. But NASA had just been rated the #1 place to work in the federal government.
Interesting.
Right? So you have this organization with some of the smartest people on the planet, literal rocket scientists, Nobel Prize winners. You have some of the most engaged people rating this place with very high job satisfaction. They would donate back tens of thousands of their hours of paid time off back to the government because they were so dedicated to the mission. And so to say that NASA's culture was to blame just really raised important questions then about, well, what the heck is culture?
If this is the best place to work and they're saying the
Yes.
culture's to blame, like, what the
Yeah.
heck? Yeah.
What are we missing? And
Yeah.
so my now business partner, Dr. Philip Mead, was asked to lead the culture change initiative at Kennedy Space Center. And he learned there's this whole field called organizational psychology, which is really about understanding, explaining, and predicting behavior at work. And so he hired me and a team of organizational psychologists to come in and work with him on NASA's culture. And so some of what was happening is basically there's all these invisible forces that are acting on us as human beings all the time. They are shaping our beliefs, they're driving emotions within us, and those things ultimately shape our decisions and how we show up with each other. And so, what Philip was looking into, my business partner, was some of the lack of psychological safety. Because that foam that I mentioned that hit the orbiter, there were 3 different teams at NASA that knew about it and were worried about it. And they were using all of these informal channels of communication to raise this as a concern because this other governing body actually said that we're not going to worry about foam strikes during the launch. That's something else a lot of people don't know is that foam had been hitting the orbiter for years and it had never previously posed a safety threat. So these engineers are really just looking to climb kind of a big mountain here. And ultimately, when they couldn't produce a genuine quote unquote requirement, when they didn't have actual data to say this would be catastrophic for sure. In fact, what they wanted was more data. They were wanting to request imagery. Can we get pictures of Columbia in orbit so we know how bad the damage is? But they couldn't produce a genuine requirement because of previous decisions that were made. They ended up just letting it go. And they don't let it go because they don't care. There's actually this crazy process that happens where when there's not enough psychological safety to speak up, self-deception kicks in, the psychological immune system kicks in, and people actually start to convince themselves that maybe this is going to be okay.
Yeah, maybe this is really not as big of a problem as I think it's gonna be because I
Exactly.
just don't yeah.
Maybe it's going to be fine. It's kind of like, well, I did try and they did say that foam strikes aren't an issue. And so maybe it's going to be okay. And tragically, of course, it wasn't. And so when they looked at it and they said, hold on, you have 3 different teams here who are worried about this. And like in some cases, genuinely very concerned about it. Like, what's broken? How did we not elevate this to the degree that it got the attention needed? The other problem with this too, Christy, is even if they did discover the damage via the pictures, they had no clear idea of what to do. Like, there's no manual that
Yeah.
says, here's how you fix the wing of the shuttle while it's orbiting the Earth. Now,
Right, so that it can be safe. So it's not
yes,
like there was definitely a solution to this
correct.
challenge, but at the same time too, it was the problem of not being escalated to a point where there could have been a decision that was made
Yeah.
about it versus just let's wait, watch, and see and hope for the best.
Exactly. And, people think about Apollo 13, and I wasn't alive for that, but I saw the movie, fantastic movie. They were able to do incredible things. And so, even though there wasn't a solution, if they did, in fact, discover a catastrophic problem, this is NASA, like maybe they could
Mhm.
have pulled something off. But all of
Especially
these
with the hive
variables,
mind that they have from everybody
yes.
that's involved. Like, if you get all these brilliant minds working
Hmm.
together to solve a problem, there may be a solution that not another person had considered. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And so it's a little bit, and this feels too harsh to say, especially because gosh, everybody that I worked with at NASA cared deeply about the lives of the astronauts. I never met a single person that didn't care deeply about the lives of the astronauts. And so I don't want it to sound harsher than it is, but there's almost an element of like burying your head in the sand of like, well, there might be a problem. There's a quote actually from one of the mission management team meetings where the mission manager said, well, there's really not anything for us to do about it during the flight. So it's not an issue.
Yeah.
And so psychological safety was one of the key things that I was actually brought in to help with. So I was working with leaders internally to help them understand how might you be accidentally sending signals that's like shutting down team communication. And actually, let me just pause. Christy, are you familiar with that term of psychological safety?
Yes, yes. Well,
Okay.
and as a leader in my organization, we have assessed sometimes like where we are. And honestly, as you're talking about this, I'm thinking about a conversation we had earlier. I'm already like reassessing because you're not. It's hard to prioritize and know what to prioritize at different
Yes.
things. But that felt psychological safety can really, like you said, allow people to feel like they have a voice if they see concerns. And we had a safety concern even earlier today that was a psychological safety. Like I don't feel safe because this is not
working the way that it needs to be working. It was sort of like a lock on the door, okay? Literally, okay?
Okay.
But
Yeah.
it was how do we address that and not just shut it down, but give it space to be heard and then figure
Right.
out what is the best solution to address that problem for people to feel physically safe at work. But then there's also the mentally psychological, how can we feel safe here?
Big time. Yeah. And so, do people in the organization feel willing to be vulnerable enough to raise these kinds of concerns? One thing I didn't mention yet is that I told you they didn't have the data. They didn't actually know how bad the damage was because they couldn't see exactly where the foam hit. NASA literally has places where the walls are painted with an expression: "In God we trust, all others must bring data." So to say, as an engineer at NASA, not having data, but like, I just have a gut feeling that it's different this
Something's not
time.
right. Yeah.
It's not the level of vulnerability required for engineers to stand up like that and say that without the fear of what that might mean for their career, especially if they are wrong.
What that means is you better bring proof if you think
Yes.
something's wrong. Well,
Yeah.
if I don't
Give
have
us the
all the
data.
proof, but I know that something's wrong, then it's
Hmm.
not really a safe environment for me to bring that because I'm assuming this is what happened, right? Is what I'm hearing you
Yes,
say is
exactly.
that they bring the stuff, they bring some data. It may not be a complete picture, and then you're getting shut down because you haven't brought all the picture to the
Correct.
yeah.
Yeah, you got it. And
Mhm.
but the thing is, like, no leader there would actually want to shut down a genuine concern about safety, right? So they're not consciously shutting this down. This is a self-awareness problem. It's a self-awareness gap. And so a lot of the work that I was doing there was to help leaders grow their self-awareness so they could recognize when their own subconscious defense mechanisms were sending out these signals to shut down communication. That was a huge part of our work. And I wanted to share all of that context because, first of all, as like a 24-year-old, when I first started working there, that was just an incredibly sobering reason, to apply what I've been learning about organizational psychology. But after being there for a couple of years, I took one of many 360 instruments. And I remember being in this leadership training in the cafeteria at lunch break, reading my 30 plus page report. And I turned to this page. I've gotten pretty good feedback up to this point. But now I look at this page where the respondents were asked, does Laura ever use some of these negative influence tactics? Yep. I'm seeing that expression. She's like, I know it's coming.
Listen, and I'm cringing on the inside because self-awares I think I get, there's times where even in this, as you're talking about this, I'm processing some things that like we don't
Yes.
realize it, but it's our own defensive that comes up that sends very small signals that
Yes.
you really want to prioritize this person's safety, but you're trying to preserve yourself in the midst
Yeah.
of also responding. So
Yeah.
I'm seeing the full picture. Okay,
You're
so
seeing it. You're
you get
seeing
to
it
this
come together.
page,
I get to
you
this
get to this
page.
page on your assessment, and you're like.
Yes. So, and most of the feedback was actually pretty positive, but the part that just felt like I got punched in the stomach is that there were a couple people on my team who indicated that they thought that I would sometimes, they didn't write this in, this was like one of the negative tactics listed out, bully them intellectually. Oh,
Oh,
oh.
how did that make
I
you
was
feel when
like,
you read that?
oh my God, I wanted to throw up. I don't even know what my face looked like, but I met with my assigned coach later that afternoon and I was telling her about it and how awful it felt. And she was like, oh, I saw your face in the cafeteria. It was hilarious. I'm like, I don't,
This might be a thing that organizational psychologists do. Like, I'm seeing you read your report, and I'm
I
seeing
know.
you react because I know what you're getting to.
Yeah. No, it felt terrible. It was shocking. I mean, I felt so embarrassed,
Yeah, because that wasn't your
honestly.
intention,
It was not
right? Like,
well,
your intention is not to make
of
people
course not.
feel in this way. Yeah.
And but you like here I am, an organizational psychologist with a PhD in psychology who's been brought in to help leaders cultivate psychological safety, and I'm struggling to do that for at least a couple people on my own team. Like, oh my gosh, just imposter syndrome, fraud, like all of it. So it was a very, very humbling and very difficult moment for me. But I realized it's not enough to know. It's not enough to know what psychological safety is. I had not only self awareness gaps, but I had self acceptance gaps.
Mm.
Because to your point, Christy, at no point was I like, you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to go in and bully some people intellectually. Like I never wanted to do that. But it offered me the chance to introspect and reflect. And I can definitely think of times where I would be in meetings and I would feel passionately about a subject. And I think probably I started to question, am I not explaining this well enough? Why isn't my team just fully on board with what I'm expressing? And I would probably get a little tone to kind of, make my point
I
more
want to add some
adamantly,
to this, like,
some
this is why we're going to
yeah.
do this.
Or I start to like pull in, what the research says. I'm not confident enough that it's just my opinion. I'm trying to like back it up with others. And so I'm like, yeah. I mean, I never intended to bully people intellectually, but I can see how it was a subconscious defense mechanism that I would employ sometimes, usually probably related to fears around my own incompetence.
Yeah, yeah,
And
and I think this
yeah,
happens a lot, right? Because 'Cause you're
yes.
not feeling 100% like, I'm in this role that it sounds like was pretty early on. Was this, like, earlier on in your career as
Yeah, I
well
was
that you
like
got thrust in this, or had you been in it for a
mid to
minute?
late 20s. Yeah, I
Okay,
was like 2 or
okay,
3
so
years
I'm in
in.
this big place, right?
Mhm.
And this is what I'm being tasked to do. So, yeah, I can see that, and that's where, like, it's those self-defense mechanisms that I still wanna look confident, I still wanna look competent, and I still wanna lead this team, but subconsciously, I'm sending out these maybe signals that your perspective may not be as important as my perspective, or at least in this what
Yes,
I'm hearing you say,
absolutely.
and I'm bullying, but you're really not intending to bully. It's
I
just
didn't intend
because
to, for sure.
yeah, yeah,
And so that was when I really started the process of digging into the self-acceptance piece, because the other thing about me in my 20s is that if you would have asked me if I was confident, and felt good about myself, I would have been like, "Absolutely." Like, I feel
100%.
great about me. And at the same time, I was incredibly self-critical.
Mm,
So self-critical, like so many high achievers are that I work with. I had a raging inner critic. I would be maybe harder on myself than anybody else would be on me. And I thought that that was just kind of how it was. I thought this is
yeah.
just sort of a necessary part of being a high achiever.
Doesn't everybody judge themselves so harshly and
Yeah,
have all these,
yeah,
every moment I make a decision, I'm second guessing myself and saying this is
yeah.
maybe, are
Aren't
people
you
perceive me this way, or
aren't you supposed to
yeah.
focus on all of your flaws and imperfect? How else are you supposed to grow if you're not kind of beating yourself up for all that? And so the idea of self-acceptance, when that was really brought to me first, I actually had a big hurdle to overcome, which is I had this mistaken idea that self-acceptance and self-improvement were opposites. I thought they were opposite ends of a continuum. And I see a lot of people out in the world that think this. A lot of high achievers, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of self starters think self acceptance and self improvement are opposites. But paradox theory highlights this is not true. So the opposite of self acceptance isn't self improvement. The opposite of self acceptance is self judgment. So I was like, oh, well, I do judge myself. That's true.
Mhm.
And so paradox theory says these are not opposites. Actually, imagine in your mind right now two, like an XY axis, right? You get a 2 by 2 matrix here where you can be high or low on self acceptance and you can be high or low on self improvement. So I'm really confident, Christy, that your listeners are high on self improvement. They're
Yeah,
not going to
they're
listen to your
listening, they're
show. Yeah.
listening.
they're not going to listen to your show if they're not high on self improvement. So
If you're listening, we are assuming you are high on
self
self-improvement.
improvement. Yep. You're like, how can I learn? How can I grow? How can I better myself? And so, what blew my mind with paradox theory was, oh, so I can focus on self improvement from a self judging lens, or I can focus on self improvement from a self accepting lens. And research is actually very clear that when you focus on self acceptance or self improvement from a self accepting lens, you will grow so much faster, you will learn more, and you're going to enjoy the journey. And so I did I created the quiz that I had shared with you to help.
Which is a great quiz, by the way. I
Yeah.
was like, "Oh," I had a question mark, honestly, before I took it. I'm like, "What's this
What is this?
self-acceptance? What is this?" And then I actually took it, and then actually when I got the result, I'm like, "Oh, this is brilliant." Because I
Yes.
have heard so many times too, and I mean, we all face our different periods of time where we can be more critical of ourselves than others, or be more self-judging than self-acceptance. But honestly, to your point, is that when people can find that higher self acceptance along with that self improvement, I mean, really, when we talk about possibilities, anything is really possible
Absolutely.
because you're able to walk with yourself and give yourself grace. Like as we're processing this out
Mhm.
loud, I'm thinking again about a meeting I had earlier. I'm like, ooh, maybe I didn't respond subconsciously that way. That could have been whatever. But that self awareness piece, to your point, helps me realize, okay, it wasn't necessarily bad or good that you did that. It just may be another way that you can reinforce that psychological safety later. So that is way just what's going around in my mind right now. But it
Yes,
sounds like you were
totally.
able to realize that these things weren't going in two different directions, that
Mhm.
actually more that the self-improvement and the self-acceptance can go in the same direction, the
Yes,
more
you can be
likelihood
high on
that you can
both.
learn, grow, change. Yeah.
And you can choose to be high on both, and that's the thing too, is that it really is a choice, and it's a choice that you get to make over and over again to accept yourself in a moment until it does just become more second nature. And if any of your listeners do wanna take it, maybe even take it and then keep listening, it's just selfacceptancequiz.com. We work
Yeah,
to make
and
it
we'll
as
put
easy
it
as
in the link
possible.
up so you can have it to even make it easier. So if you're listening to like this on Apple or Spotify or wherever, just click the maybe pause the recording right now before we go any further. Go
Mhm.
take this quiz. It really is phenomenal. I actually had a few people around me take it too because I'm like, where are you?
Yeah.
And then we'll kind of talk about maybe the different ways people land in that and kind of
Mhm.
how you help them walk through that.
Absolutely. And I love that you invited other people to take it, and I'm excited to dig into it with you, Christy, because we were talking just briefly before we hit record, like not everybody knows the concepts of self-acceptance, but I'd love to share your results if I may.
Sure,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead. I told her I'm willing to be a guinea
Guinea
pig.
pig. Yeah. Okay. So Christy ended up with a high score in both self-acceptance and self-improvement. And so in this 2 by 2 matrix, that means that Christy, you're up in that upper right. And we have labeled that the flowing and growing quadrant. This is where I want more people in the world to be. And so when I saw your result, I got really excited because I was like, oh, she has done some of this work. She has actively worked to change the relationship that she has with herself. And at no point, well, maybe at some point you did, but if at any point you were worried that that was going to make you complacent, like, nope, you stayed focused on your self improvement as well. So that flowing and growing is where you ended up. And so when I was asking you about that, Christy, what are some of the things that you think that you have done to change the relationship you have with yourself?
I mean, we talked about this too before we pushed record button. I mean, this relationship with self is a journey, and I loved how you showed me on your
It's
arm when you were
tattooed
tattooing
on
that
my wrist. Journey,
journey.
not
Because
the band.
it really is a journey, and I'm like there were times in my life where I was probably a lot more self-critical, and I'm not saying that I'm still not critical or can be judgmental of myself at times. I can get stuck on something and it's normally around that intention piece. To be
Mm,
honest with you, is like whenever I feel like somebody misperceives my intention or may have delivered something and they're receiving something that was not what I was really trying to say or trying to make them feel. Kind of like when you were probably reading your assessment, you're like, oh, that is not how I want to make people feel at all.
no.
Then
Yeah.
that's where I can kind of get and slip into that self judgment. But I would say that for me, I would say it's probably a three-prong approach to probably getting into that more is I'll be honest with you. One of it's just doing stuff. The more you try stuff, the more you realize that things they might fall apart, but you can keep going and you're still standing. But I do
Mm,
think it comes with work of that self awareness. And sometimes we don't automatically are aware of things that are within ourselves. So those other people, whether it be a coach, I've done coaching, I've done therapy, my own therapy, I've
mhm.
had consultants, I've had mentors, I've had loved ones, I've had spiritual guides, is what I would call them, just to kind of wrap that all up. And so people of faith that have helped interject into my life. And I think that through those processes of people either reflecting back to me what they saw or helping me be aware of things, even like my leadership team that I have here, sometimes
Mhm.
they'll bring stuff to my awareness that I was like, oh, did that come off that way? Or, oh, yeah, I maybe didn't respond favorably to that. And then being able to figure out how to work through that without just saying that I'm all bad or I'm all terrible and then leaving it there, right? But
Yeah.
it's like, how can I review or how can I give myself permission to be human too? I think it's a big,
Yes. Oh, that's
yeah.
huge. Oh my gosh.
And
As a
that's
psychologist, that was so big for me, Christy. People are like,
not me.
you're a psychologist. And I'm like, yes. And that does not take away my humanness.
Well, and let's talk about this because, a lot of my therapist friends, as a therapist too, it's the same way. You put sometimes this pressure on yourself because you're holding the space for everybody else to be controlled, maybe in your emotional response or to be that supportive person or put yourself up on this pedestal because I'm a professional. And then sometimes I have to remind myself, yes, but you get to be human too.
Yeah.
And that can really be a hard thing when you have a role that many people view as I don't know, what's the word? Maybe you got a word view as kind of like this person's got it together and they
Yeah. Like
you know.
you're in the helper chair. And so you're supposed to have this all figured out.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
figured it
No,
all out.
no,
Yeah.
no.
Not
No, me neither. You
not
let me know if you get there.
yeah, no, I don't think so. I think I really say that I could live this lifetime probably 1,000 times over and still not have it figured it out,
Yeah. And maybe you have. I don't know.
Mhm. So
Right.
so let's talk a little bit about this because we did talk about that you find that a lot of people put themselves in this, what is it? Pressured,
So pushing but pressured.
pushing but pressured
Yeah, I think that
quadrant.
yeah, most of the people that I am working with I put them in that high achiever bucket. And this is so funny too, Christy, to me. Some of them even struggle to identify themselves as high achievers because they're such chronic high achievers and they right? Like,
Achievers are the worst. They're like, "I haven't achieved nothing," and then you give them a
yes.
space for reflection, and you're like, "Well, write down maybe some of the
Mhm.
things that have you've done that maybe you've done over the past 3 years, 1 year, 5
Yep.
years," and they start to reflect, and they may not give credit to the things that they've done, though, that's the
They
challenge.
don't.
But then
They really don't.
when they really yeah, but then when you're, like, reframing it back to them, I'm like, "But you've done this, 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 this." Like, "How did you do it?" You know?
Yeah, I know. And it's so funny to me when people who seem so objectively high achieving struggle with that identity because they are so hard on themselves. Um, and I still call them high achievers. So they're high on self improvement. They're constantly striving, they're constantly setting new goals for themselves, but they are lower on self acceptance. And I will just say, I'll just caveat, this quiz is not the full psychometric version of all of this, right? It's like a 3 to 5 minute thing. You take it quickly and we're
It's really easy,
dichotomizing.
yeah,
It's super
yeah.
easy. It's meant to be easy. I'm just saying, like, you're not actually just low or high on self
Mhm.
acceptance and self improvement. It's an entire continuum. This is just an indicator.
Yeah.
But the people that have more perfectionist tendencies are the high achievers who are high on self improvement, but they're lower on self acceptance. So they're very self critical. They struggle to celebrate. They struggle to accept praise or compliments. And they end up getting triggered in a lot of day to day interactions based on all of their inner harsh judgments. Like one of the things that I say all the time is what bugs me about you is really about me.
Ooh, I
And
like that. I'm gonna write that down,
yeah,
what bugs me, because it's true, but
it's
we don't always are aware of that, right?
well, and sometimes it's the like, I see this thing in you and I also tend to do that and that's what bothers me. Sometimes it is that, but there's actually another way to think about this, which is what bugs about you is really about me. So part of me, if I'm like agitated, I'm frustrated, I'm annoyed, I'm bugged, then part of me is making your behavior about me. I am personalizing what you are doing or not doing. Like, I could have a friend who is late meeting me at the movies. And if it's triggering me and I'm getting annoyed and cranky about it, I'm probably telling myself the story that she wouldn't be late if I was more important to her. And so it's actually my self judgment of my own importance or lack thereof that's getting triggered internally. Like, that's my stuff. And this is true because there are other people in the same situation who are totally unbothered.
Yeah,
Not
totally
everybody's bothered by
not
the same
bothered at
stuff.
all.
Yeah. So you're never responding to the world around you. You're only ever responding to the meaning that you are putting on things. And the meaning that you're putting on things is going to be directly related to how you see yourself. So every reaction you have is based on how you feel about yourself. And so self acceptance, I talk about it as the key to making everything in your life easier. And that sounds like hyperbole, and it's not. It is actually that big. It is that important for you to have the relationship with yourself where, like you said, Christy, you are kind to yourself. You give yourself grace. You give yourself compassion. You allow yourself to be human. You let yourself feel good about progress. Celebrate the steps that you've taken. Even when you hit a goal, even if it took you longer than you wanted to, celebrate it, acknowledge yourself. I talk about a practice of taking credit, something that anybody can do every single day if they want to move from that upper left quadrant, which is high self improvement, low self acceptance, right? That pushing but pressured, over into the quadrant where you get to hang out, Christy, which is that flowing and growing. If your listeners will start to take credit every single day, find at least one thing that you can take credit for. I'm not talking about stealing credit. I mean something that you will let yourself feel good about today. You are building the muscle of self acceptance. And it feels weird for a lot of people to start doing this because they're used to focusing on just the gap and not the
Yeah.
gain.
I mean, if they could probably talk back to us, okay, right now, Laura, I feel like a lot of them would be like, you want me to take credit because it is uncomfortable. It really
Yes,
is. Like,
it's
I don't know about
vulnerable.
you, but sometimes when people read a bio of like, the creditor or whatever, and I'm like cringing. So I will say that,
Yeah.
and I hope you'd agree with me that people can vacillate. You might be in that quadrant of flowing and growing, but it doesn't mean that you can go straight back to the quadrant of, that self judgment because I can think about sometimes when people are giving credit and you're like, wow, that person sounds great. I'd love to meet them. And then you're
Mhm.
like, wait, that's me.
That's me. Oh my
I have
God.
to give myself that credit too,
Yeah,
right?
I
Why do you
know.
think it is hard for people to, and I know it goes back to this self acceptance, but to give themselves credit for maybe it's things they did or how they showed up in the world today or the thing that they did for somebody else? Like, why is it so hard for us to give ourselves credit?
It's actually really vulnerable to do.
Mm.
And I think a lot of people, when they think about vulnerability, they often think about the negative emotions associated with being vulnerable. So, like, maybe I'm willing to, well, maybe not. Let me just say, maybe I'm thinking about vulnerability as like admitting that I'm sad, or vulnerability of I'm admitting a weakness, vulnerability of admitting that I was wrong or that I made a mistake. I think we often think about vulnerability just as hanging out more in that negative emotion because it can feel so vulnerable. It's emotional risk taking for me,
Mhm.
maybe to stand up in a room and say, I made a mistake. And it feels like a risk because maybe people will judge me, which, by the way, research actually shows us that people don't judge you for your shortcomings. They judge you based on your perceived shortcomings or lack thereof. So when you do stand up and you admit that you have a shortcoming or that you've made a mistake, the impressions people have of you actually go up dramatically. We really do tend to respect vulnerability so much in other people, and then we're just terrified of it for ourselves.
Oh,
So
that's a whole nother
that's
podcast
a
right
whole thing.
there
I
too.
know. I have so much
Because
to
it
say about
is
all of
true.
this.
I can't tell you how many times I listen to other people's podcasts or watch a story and I'm like, wow, I love that they were so vulnerable. And I don't know if
Hmm.
this is a therapist psychologist thing, because
Hmm.
we're trained to kind of keep our stuff to our stuff self whenever we're helping support other people, right?
Yep.
But I'm like, oh, but then I know on here, whenever we have conversations like this, or I lean into my own story or share some of the things that I'm like, ooh, this is going to be out there in the world. And then it can
Hmm.
feel a little bit like you said, perceived shortcoming or perceived how are people going to react. But it's
Yes.
almost those times that really allow for that connection piece. And then people, I don't think most
Yes.
people recoil from anything that people share that's human.
Yeah, very few. I mean, occasionally it does happen. And that's part of
Yeah.
where self acceptance becomes so important and useful is look, judgment from other people is only going to bother you where you judge yourself.
Mm. Oh, can you repeat that again for
Yeah,
people in the back?
of course. So judgment from other people is only going to bother you where you judge yourself. So one of the implications here around self acceptance is if I have stopped judging myself for something, then I am no longer fearing what other people might think of me. And it makes it so much easier for me to be real and authentic. I mean, the story that I shared, Christy, that was, gosh, that was 14, 15 years ago, something like that. So it's been a hot minute since that has happened. And, I think it took years for me to get to a place where I could have enough compassion for where I was in those moments and not feel embarrassed. Like I was embarrassed at the time, but I don't feel embarrassed now to share it because I actually believe that it's a very common experience. I think it's a very shared
Hmm.
experience. I know that there's plenty of people listening who have gotten feedback before that was a shock to their system. And the reality about the human experience is that there's nothing that you experience where you're the only one. ever.
Yeah. So
That's the
true.
connection you're talking about.
If we think we're the only one when we're going through, but I mean, at this point, there's been people who've been living on this earth for a long time and a
Mhm.
lot of people. So you're right. At some point, it may look a little bit different, but there is shared experiences that we all like anything that
Yeah.
we go through, somebody else has went through. It's
And
true.
at the feeling level, it's all the same. Like, we all are on the
Hmm.
same emotional spectrum as humans. We all feel the same emotions. We all have the same desires in terms of, that wanting to feel seen, heard, loved, understood, connected. Like, there are fundamental things that we are all hardwired to want as human beings. And so I have done a lot of work to get to a place where I can share things that I've literally shared some stories before, Christy, in front of a room of like executives where it's maybe like 10 people. There was this one time I shared this story, and it didn't have like a super happy ending necessarily. Like, it was just a difficult thing that I went through. And this woman was like, "Is that the end of your story?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's the end." She's like, That's so embarrassing." But like, she was so uncomfortable that
It was uncomfortable for you. It
she
sounds
was
like.
so uncomfortable for me. Like, my vulnerability, my willingness to be vulnerable was so intense for her because it triggered all of her fears around her own
Mm,
vulnerabilities. But most people were just looking at me with such like appreciation that I was
compassion,
willing to do
probably.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Cause I think I was talking about,
Understanding.
yeah, I
Yeah.
lost, not to death, but I went through something with a friend where like I lost a friend, and it was a really hard
Hmm.
experience for me. And I think most humans know that feeling. Most people have gone through that. So most people really are going to judge you based on how well do you see yourself. And so they really respond well when you can lean into that vulnerability. So let me close the loop because like we have been
Yeah.
on a really fun ride here. But the vulnerability piece, coming back to why is it hard to take credit? Taking credit's actually pretty vulnerable. So when you let yourself feel good about something that you've done, when you feel proud of yourself for something, or you feel joy about something, anybody could just stomp on that if they wanted to.
Yeah.
And
That takes real courage, right?
it
Like
does. It really
sharing, I'm
does.
proud of myself. I'm proud of me. Like, have you ever seen that Snoop
Yes.
Dogg video where
I don't know if I
Snoop
have.
Dogg's like,
You'll have to send it
I
to
want
me.
to thank me for
Oh, yeah.
being me or something like
Yes.
that.
So good.
So he
I
was
love
doing
that.
that. He was taking credit
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
himself for where he had gotten to, and he was
Hmm.
shouting it from the rooftops. But like you said, with that vulnerability, there always is that's an emotional risk because people
Hmm.
would be like, "What's he talking about? He did that, right?" I mean, I don't think that was
Yeah.
most people's response,
Probably not for
but
Snoop Dogg. He was able to
yeah.
pull it off. But some did. Some did still respond like
But some
that.
did been like, "What? He's giving himself all that credit. What about these people that helped him here or helped him there?" You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like,
Hmm.
but what I'm hearing you say is people that are then critical, maybe necessarily of somebody else taking credit, that normally means there's something within them
It's always
that's
about them.
being triggered,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And they're responding to maybe an internal judgment that they might have because it might be super
100%.
uncomfortable for them to take credit, or they may perceive themselves as not having anything to take credit for,
Exactly.
which is when we're all in self what I'm getting to and what I'm hearing you say is when we all get better at this self-acceptance, which is a journey, like you said,
Journey.
then we all can kind of be able to see people as people. It doesn't mean that
Hmm.
we don't need to set boundaries sometimes or acknowledge certain things, but we're able to more show up authentically as ourselves and be
Yeah.
okay with that.
100%. I mean,
Which who
and
wouldn't want that?
who doesn't want that? It is
Yeah.
so ridiculously liberating. And it is very much a journey that I'm still on. And it's for me, it's kind of like when I grew up in Phoenix and I would go hike in the mountains with my family, and it looked like the top of the mountain was still so far away. But then we'd pause for a break and I'd turn around and I'd be like, holy crap, look how far we've come. When
Yeah.
I can stop and I can look back and I can recognize how far I've come, it feels so good to know that I have gotten to this point in my relationship with myself where there are so many things I'm no longer afraid to be, and so many things I'm no longer afraid to share. And if we all do this, then we're all going to feel that much more connected. Like, literally, this will solve the world's problems. I'm not even kidding. Like, it is. There's a reason I'm like borderline evangelical about this as a concept, because
I love it. I love it.
it is the key to making everything in your life easier. Literally everything in your life is easier when you have higher self acceptance. Your relationship with yourself is, like you said, the longest relationship that you're going to have, and it's critical.
Yeah. And like you said, it is a journey and it's a hard place sometimes for people to get to, but it's a muscle, what I'm
Yes.
hearing you say, that you can work and you can develop. It just makes take some time and intention. So, with that being said, if people are wanting to try to work this self-acceptance muscle, and for those of y'all who are, you can't see me, but I'm making a muscle right now with my arm. But for those that wanna, like, they're like, "Yes, you know what? You're speaking to me. I really feel like I end up a lot in this self-judgment space. I
Mhm.
have expectations for myself that I feel like I can never meet. I feel like I'm always pushing myself down." Then what is maybe a next step for them to take on this journey? Whether it be take the quiz, whether it be,
Mhm.
something for them to look at, consider.
For sure. Yeah, I would say take the quiz, see where you are right now, selfacceptancequiz.com. And oh, you said something, Christy, earlier that I wanted to address where you
Yeah.
said that you can move around. Like this
Mhm.
can change over time. And I completely agree with that. When you take this is an indicator of where you are right now. It absolutely can and will change. And the underlying goal around all of this is what if you get to a place with your self acceptance where it actually doesn't change depending on what's happening for you in your life? Like a lot of us know what it feels like to feel good about ourselves in a moment when we've just had a victory or we've done really well. And then we feel not so good when we've just had a setback. Or I might feel really good about myself in this person's presence because they make it easier for me to be me. But over here, I don't feel so good about myself because I think that they're a little bit judgmental or critical of me. But you always choose how you feel about you. And so it can change. And I think the underlying goal of all of this work is to get to a place where your self acceptance stays high regardless of the external environment, regardless of what's happening around you. So take the
That is the
quiz.
goal. That would
That is
sound
the
a great
goal.
goal to get to.
That is what we are here to do. And so take the quiz to see where you are. Taking credit is a fantastic practice for you to put into immediate use. You can find an accountability buddy. You can do this with like a spouse or just a friend or a coworker, somebody else that would probably also benefit. I think everybody would benefit from a practice of taking credit. We do take credit Tuesday within my team.
Oh,
Um,
I love it.
yeah, but I would say,
Well, we do
do it every day.
celebrate the wins, so it's a little bit different, right? But it is where
That's
you're trying to
yeah,
celebrate
similar.
what did we win together at and what do we win individually at. And it is a reflective space that if you have struggled doing this, sometimes what I'm hearing you say is inviting other people
Yeah.
along with that
Oh yeah.
accountability piece might help you honor that commitment to try. And I think it could help with them reflecting back to you if you're missing out on that thing that you need to take credit for, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yep. And
and I have
on
a
the
friend and we do this a lot, and she's like, "Chrissy, I'm just glad that you remind me to take credit
Mhm.
for these things," you know?
Yeah, for sure.
And she helps
Because
me remind me to take credit for things, and I'm like, "Oh, that wasn't that big of a deal." "Yes, it was." Give
yeah,
yourself a pat on the back.
seriously. Yeah, be your own cheerleader for sure. And, taking credit, um, any little step, there's nothing too small to take credit for. So the times when it feels the hardest to take credit is actually when it's the most important.
Yeah. Ooh, say that that's for the people in the back, she said, when it's hardest, that's when you need to be doing it, okay? And that's a testament for all of us.
Yeah.
So,
And so those are some immediate steps that people can take to really start that self-acceptance practice. Oh, and if you do the quiz, you're going to get a series of kind of coaching emails based on your results that will give you some ideas of maybe how you've landed where you are. And if you're wanting to move up into that upper right quadrant, what can you do?
okay, awesome. Well, and if people want to connect with you more, I know if they do the quiz and they'll kind of get some more information from you, but is there any other place that you hang out with that you're like, hey, come find me over here, or where they can maybe connect with you or find out a little bit more?
I love to hang out on LinkedIn, actually. That's where I post the most.
Okay.
Most of my stuff is in this realm of self acceptance. I do talk about leadership because I do a lot of work with leaders on their self acceptance and self awareness. But yeah,
Yeah,
if you
because
want
that's
to
a journey.
connect,
That's a
it's
journey.
all a journey. Just tell me that you heard me here on Christy's show when you connect with me, and I'll be happy to connect with you and like answer any questions that came up.
Okay, awesome. Well, I have a final question for you.
Yes.
What is something that maybe you wanted that you wish when you were younger that you were more self accepting of?
Oh gosh, everything.
Everything.
I mean, yeah, when I was younger, I was critical about so much. The first two answers that came to mind is that one was my physical appearance. I spent far too much energy and time picking apart everything that I thought didn't meet some BS idealized standard of beauty. And the other one was just the simple idea of like making mistakes. I hated making mistakes when
That
I was
fear of
little.
failure was strong.
It
Is
was
that what
so
I'm hearing? Yeah.
strong. Yeah, I didn't want to be judged as incompetent. And so I would get really defensive anytime I would make a mistake. And I didn't show up with self accountability, which is actually really obnoxious behavior. And I did that quite a bit. And so for me, it was wonderful to be able to learn a different way.
Yeah. So it's like if you would go back, it's like, you need to work on love you more. Love you
Yes.
more.
Yeah. Yeah. I would have worked on changing my relationship with myself. And there's a quote that I wish that I could have told my younger self, which is there is no amount of self improvement that ever makes up for a lack of self acceptance.
Mm, that's good. I got to write that one down.
Yeah. That's Dr. Robert
Because it's
Holden.
true. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it really is true. Because you can work all day, but if you're not acknowledging the work that you're doing, or you're not giving yourself credit, or you're not being forgiving of yourself as you're on that journey, then you can learn all day and still feel terrible. And I mean, and when you're in a self-critical space, it's like you're trapped. So in my own experience, I feel like when I'm most critical of me, it's a cage. So it's how do we break free from this cage so that we can
Yeah.
really show up as who we are, which as many people going back to that have lived on this earth and planet, there's only one of you that will ever be. So it's how can we learn to love ourselves for who we are and how we show up in the world and being more accepting of that. So well,
Absolutely.
I just want to, Dr. Laura, acknowledge you for also like doing this work yourself because I don't think you'd be as passionate about this if you haven't done this work. I feel like people that where you have kind of gotten to the more that flowing and growing phase of life, then it's like a ripple effect, right? And so not only have you done this work through confronting your own things as you did your work as a organizational psychologist, I'm gonna get my words right in a second here, but you are like, I want to help other people learn to really have this radical self acceptance so they can be compassionate about themselves and show up in the world. Because I think that's what we do need. We need people to love themselves and show up fully. And it's a journey. It doesn't happen overnight, but the more we can show up fully, then I do think it will make the world a better place. So I
It really
appreciate you
will.
coming on today and sharing this with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Okay. And guys, y'all know I give y'all a nugget. I got so many nuggets that I was writing down over here. But I hope you just know that there is a place where if you're feeling critical about yourself, that you can learn to exercise that muscle of self acceptance. And it doesn't happen overnight. It requires you to be very gracious of yourself and to give yourself permission to be human. But if you just exercise that muscle one little bit at a time, go take that quiz. There's a lot of good resources to figure out what next steps might help you get there. Then you can just show up as you. And that's a beautiful thing. So I hope you show up as you a little bit this week. Give yourself some grace, some forgiveness, but also some credit. And we'll see you next time.
That's all for today on Inspiring Possible. If you found a little inspiration today, please go on over to iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you tune in to listen to leave us a comment and rate us. Also, make sure and link up with me at inspiringpossible.com to get the free Dream It, Write It, Do It workbook. And don't forget to follow us on social media and share this with anyone who needs to be inspired. Remember, if you can believe it, it's possible.